Okay. So hopefully we'll get that sorted as well. But I'm gonna try and take some notes as we go.
Yep, me too.
You guys are just slammed, I guess, at the moment. Is it just the new year kicking off, or you've got lots on your plate?
Yeah, I think it's everybody.
I did have a really quick question for you because it's a curiosity. Were you involved at all with they did it before COVID. It was a career fair or job fair at Blue Mountain.
I was not involved in
Do
that,
you
no.
do you do you do you remember that, or did you have no? So what
No.
they did is they actually bussed in the local high school kids
Okay.
and they set up a day of various things. So interviewing skills, how to do a resume. They had like an open area for employers, local employers to set up.
Yeah.
So I just, thinking about ways to get in front of candidates. Now that was pre-COVID, so obviously there weren't necessarily the restrictions, but I know Blue Mountain hosted, I think it was through, I want to say Georgian College. There were kind of some sponsors and then the high schools, but the neat thing is they kind of bust people in. So they were kind of a captive quote audience. But it was one
Hmm.
way to get in front of candidates face to face.
Yeah. I think that's a good takeaway, a good
And I
idea.
just don't know with COVID, what sort of with school boards
Well,
and
job fairs are happening.
community, right? What would make sense, but that could be, an example.
Yeah, in-person job fairs are happening. We have a ton of
Yeah,
them that have been happening this week. So I think this would, if anything, would be something we'd consider when we talk to our locals, for example, our
yeah,
municipalities. They could consider doing this next year.
yeah. I mean, it certainly would be a next year thing, but like getting in with the high schools
Yeah.
or whatever level of schooling, or could be another venue for getting that candidate connection piece.
Hmm.
And
Yep.
then we can talk to the group on the call today about it, but it could also be something I'm thinking for baby boomers, right? Retirees, like, could you even do something community based,
Hmm.
specifically targeting that population as another way of getting, it's kind of the passive piece of sending out a posting, hoping people will apply versus the getting in front of people directly.
Yep, absolutely. I'm curious
Could be a
too for
different way to
that.
look at it, I guess, is what I'm.
Yeah, I think for that retirement demographic, it'll be good for us to speak to. There's likely already some community events,
Sure.
right, that you can kind of piggyback on, even if they're not
Exact,
directly like a recruitment focused event. That's okay.
exactly,
Set up a table
exactly.
or yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, so just thinking, a little differently maybe.
Yes.
But we can hopefully today, I think more people are getting online.
Yeah,
Um,
we've got quite a few people jumping on here.
have a bit of that conversation. Might
Yes.
generate some ideas for your team, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. I'm sure when we get to that part of this presentation, we'll have good discussion. Just, yeah, thinking outside the box,
Yeah,
right? Instead of just
exactly,
posting
right? I
online.
mean,
Yeah.
posting is kind of somewhat passive versus, and I don't want to use the word aggressive, but the opposite, to be more
Proactive.
making those connections directly.
Yeah.
Yeah. People kind of hijacking people on the streets.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Go gently.
Yes.
Did the other document get out? The one that
Yep.
you've done that, yeah, because that's a great cheat sheet, I think.
Yep. It was sent out on Monday. And
Perfect.
I'll include it as well in the follow-up email to this group.
Yeah, and that's why I've
Still
kind
a
of
good
put the
sheet to
slide
have.
as a recap
Hmm.
piece to kind of just, yeah, pull those things forward as well.
Yep. Yes, I'll do that right now. Thank you for the suggestion.
Oh, listen, no worries. I'm just,
Oh, I'm just responding to the chat.
oh, perfect.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? I don't know because this is a meeting. I don't know if is it possible, Wendy, to give me like a co-presenter? I can't seem to attach anything in the chat. Oh, I
Um,
see it. I see it. I got it. Okay.
I was gonna say, have you got it?
Yeah, I got it here.
Perfect. So if that's the case, maybe a polling document too. I'm just
I
thinking
think we
out
can
loud,
probably just
but I think we'll
ask the
hopefully,
questions.
yeah,
Yeah.
capture that as we go. Awesome. Yep, there it is. I see it.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'll use that as a bit of a recap piece as well. A few minutes. I can't get over this weather. I just, one minute I've got green looking garden and the next minute I've got a foot and a half of snow out the back. Did you guys get dumped over where you are?
I feel like we have quite a bit of snow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's mild though, so it's all gonna melt and be nice and
Well,
slippery and dangerous.
that's the thing, right? It goes to like 0. I
Hmm.
don't know what it's doing overnight. We kind of keep, I live in a condo group, so we have people that are not up here all the time, and then some of us are permanent kind of residents, so we constantly jockey our cars around. So when the guys come in to clean the parking lot, we can kind of try and get all the spaces cleaned out.
Hmm. Okay, well, we're just before 10. I wonder
Yeah,
if we can give just a few more minutes for
yeah,
people that might be joining a little later.
sure. This can't be right. Alexa, shut down. I know.
Okay, maybe just one more minute and we can probably get started.
Okay, yeah, I think it looks like we've got about 19 or so folks on the line, which is great.
We might have some late joiners, but that's okay.
Sure.
Okay, I'm just gonna mute myself, Wendy, and I'll let you kick it off.
Okay, great. Thanks. Good morning and welcome everybody who's kind of joining us on our call today. My name is Wendy Malkin. I run a business called HR Annex Consulting, and I work with various businesses on a variety of sort of HR and business related topics. So one of the things that I've been talking with Amanda as part of Bruce County is a series of workshops, and this is the second one in the series, and we've called it a winter tune-up, with the idea that over the next hour, we're going to focus in this session around hiring and the subject of hiring. So hopefully today we'll get some dialogue and discussion, in terms of maybe some of the challenges you're facing with hiring, get some of those questions or thoughts on the table, as well as some information that we just wanted to share with you regarding hiring. And really the intention here is just to have you kind of reflect on your business currently and whether, how you might be able to apply some of this information to your business, or it may actually trigger some other thinking around your business in this particular subject. So hoping today in the next hour or so, we're going to go through some information materials, but also we'd like to have certainly a dialogue and a discussion. So with that, I'm going to kind of just jump right in. Slides to change, and I don't know why they're not. There we go. Okay, so I've done a little bit of the introduction here, and again, I just want to highlight that this is really intended to be a session where we're going to share some information. You need to consider how you may want to apply that to your business, or there may be opportunities for further discussion with Amanda and the team, after this webinar would be great, but also sharing your ideas and asking questions. So just some basic housekeeping. Hopefully everybody's familiar with the chat feature. By all means, please use that as well. But if you can keep it on mute, just to keep background noise down. But when you do want to speak, obviously take the mute button off, and please do speak up. We'll be interested to have that conversation. So this session is really considering what to consider when hiring. And really it's how you manage the hiring process being as important as who you want to or who you're interviewing. And it's really that what and how from interview to onboarding, really about protecting your investment in your business. Because obviously hiring people into your organization has a cost to your business from a operational perspective. It's not just the financial cost, there's other cost implications. So it's really what are some thoughts, things you can do, you may already be doing, which is why we've called it the tune-up. You may want to just kind of take a look at it again, your current practices, and kind of tighten them up a little bit, or maybe add some aspects to it as we go on. So we're going to start with the getting ready, what we're calling getting ready to hire. And so again, I think we have a variety of different businesses on this call, of varying sizes, different industries, different areas of focus. So you may find some of this material fairly generic, but again, we're happy to dive into more specific questions as we go, or it's something that maybe we can look at following up after the call. So this is really about what to think about when you're getting ready for hiring. So we're recognizing not everybody may have been in the first workshop of the series, which was last week. So I wanted to just do a really quick recap because there are some areas in the attracting workshop we did that kind of flow through into hiring, and they may be areas that you might have some questions in. So wanted to make sure that we kind of were able to set the stage for everybody as we sort of go into the hiring discussion. So some of these things hopefully are not going to be, anything that you're not aware of. Clearly, COVID had an impact on businesses across the board, across the world. And so you and your business, or maybe even if you're starting up a business during this time frame, have had to do some pivoting, right? So adapting to a changing marketplace. And we talked about, the aspect of attracting talent is understanding what's been going on in that marketplace, what's been changing. Rethinking how work gets done. So that conversation was really thinking about your business in terms of who does what work and how. And what we mean by that is because you may have had to pivot your business, because you may have had to make changes to adapt to your market space, you may have had to rethink actually how physically the work gets done. May have introduced some technology. For example, a lot of businesses went to online ordering, which may have had a knock-on effect within the organization as to who was doing order taking. Maybe now it's more order fulfillment. It's that kind of thinking when we talk about rethinking how work gets done. Being flexible, obviously new arrangements, you're all looking within your own business and you may have had to consider hybrid working options or, again, flexibility, hours of operation, various things that are unique to your business. But the key message here was being, flexible. And this is, again, from last week's discussion, was all in the context of attracting talent, things that you consider for your business as you look at attracting talent. Diversifying your talent pool. This particular area was, we talked about a multi-generational workforce. And again, people on the call, you may already be dealing with this, but this is the first time they're saying, a lot of articles written that we have multiple generations actively working and being available to work in the workforce. And each of these generational groups, from Gen Zs right the way through to baby boomers and sort of either ends of that spectrum, they all have different things they're looking for from an employer. So again, when you're looking to attract employees and ultimately hiring, it's kind of understanding the needs of the multi-generational workforce. Reviewing your hiring criteria. So now we've done a little bit of our homework on the market. We've thought about our business, maybe some things that are changing. And so basically reviewing your hiring criteria is really around the need to haves versus the nice to have. So when people are hiring, obviously you have let's call it a wish list of everything you want from a candidate. The reality is you may not get all of those aspects that you're looking for. You want to get as close to as you can, but it could come down to what you need to have versus the nice to have aspects. So we talked about that a bit last week, and we can again pick that up a little later on in this conversation as well. We talked about getting creative with job postings. We talked about how you're branding your business to potential candidates. Again, thinking of those multi-generational groups, maybe what social media, what forums, how you're making those connections with candidates. But when you're job posting, it's reflecting your brand. And we also highlighted job postings are not job descriptions. They're actually used as an external kind of marketing tool. And then understanding your labor market, which Amanda had shared information on Bruce County, just some things to be aware of when you think about your business, maybe in the shorter and longer term. Who's entering the labor market? What groups are coming in? What's the availability? So there was some information that was shared in the last call, which was helpful to kind of set that context. So I just wanted to take a couple of minutes to kind of recap, because again, this may be something that you have some questions on. And I think, Amanda, it looks like you've raised your hand.
Yep. I just wanted to remind everyone that we did add that cheat sheet to the chat that you can download. And that'll also go out the Attracting Talent cheat sheet that kind of reviews some of these speaking points that
Mhm.
Wendy mentioned. This will go out in a follow-up email as well to download, but just a heads up that that is there. And also, Wendy, just again, because I'm not the presenter, are you able to mute, is it Marion? And
I think, hang on a
she
second.
says she's unable to mute herself.
I don't know if I'm able to mute Marion, to be honest. I apologize.
You touch the three little dots, I think, and
I've
you
got,
should be able. If not, that's okay. She just
yeah,
put a
it's
request
just,
here.
it's not giving me that I can see, so I apologize for that.
Okay. All right.
I don't hear the noise at this point, so appreciate Marion you calling that out, and, hang on, somebody else has got another comment here. Oh, Marion, great. Okay. All right. Well, we'll just keep our eye on that one if it becomes an issue again. Thanks. Okay, Amanda, do you want me to just go
Yeah.
on there? Okay, perfect. Okay, so let me just kick off this conversation with, and again, if people want to go to the chat box, are there any specific questions that you have regarding to hiring as you were coming into this session? Things that you definitely would want to put on the table and maybe add to the conversation at this point? Is there anything kind of burning top and center? We just wanted to give you the opportunity to kind of put that out there so that we can capture that, either to pick it up in the conversation as we move through today's session, or we can parking lot it and follow that up with the group once we get to the end of today's discussion. So I'm just looking at the chat boxes if anybody has anything there, or if anybody wants to. We've got one person coming in. Oh, so policies and procedures for training staff. Okay. Okay, so we've got that one.
We had our, is this a good time maybe to ask our poll questions?
Yeah, yeah, sure. We can also get a sense from the group, in terms of how we do this. Maybe it's again, and unfortunately, the way this is my mistake, I'd set this session up. We won't do a polling online, but we might be able to just get people's responses. Interview questions. Let me just pick that up. Great, that's a good one. I think we can cover that one off. Any other kind of front and center questions? Kind of burning top of mind posting?
These are good because we're looking
Yeah,
to discuss some of these through the session.
excellent. So post-hiring process. Oh, the stories don't check out. Okay. It's a good point. So as we go through this, what'll be great is if we pick it up in the material, then basically we'll hopefully try and answer it then. If not, I'm making a note so that we can follow back up on any of these specific questions, which would be great, and send it maybe, Amanda, back out to the group as a fact sheet or a cheat sheet or something along those lines, or it could be another session altogether. I mean, just to be clear, we have an hour today, and it's kind of how long is a piece of string. We could spend, these are great questions people have. We could probably dive deeply into each one of these and spend time talking to them. So it may be an opportunity for a further conversation, but we'll try and at least cover them off as we go. How you want to hire somebody, okay?
And just a reminder that for these, today is meant to kind of get our minds thinking in a different way, perhaps, and give some suggestions and creative thinking on when it comes to hiring and to some of these questions that are in the chat. But everyone is encouraged to, I think what I'll do at the end of the session is post the booking link to book a consult. And then that way you can connect with one of our business development coordinators and we can work one-on-one with you regarding some of your workforce and hiring challenges.
Yep. Excellent. Okay, this is great, guys. So this is the kind of thing that we'd love to kind of have you guys put it here. I see one more question. Oh, organizational fit. That's a great one. I think we will cover that as we get into it a little later today. Benefits for contractors. Okay. Perfect. Okay, thanks, guys. So let's just keep on going. This is great. And again, if we get to the end of today and we haven't specifically covered it, by all means, flag it to us. And as Amanda said, we'll have a follow-up. So with that, let me dive into the next slide here. Okay, oops, I think I jumped ahead here. So this is all part of the getting ready to hire, and this may also generate some questions and some of the questions that people were just asking us, right? So where and how are you posting? Okay, so there are lots of options. Social media, there's some interesting articles that we can include. I know we talked about attracting employees in the last workshop. Different generations are interested and use different types of social media platforms. And so it may be a consideration if you have a posting that you look at the social media platform, for example, professionals that kind of fall into that Gen X population, potentially millennials into the LinkedIn, versus if you're looking for Gen Zs, you know, maybe you're looking at more, I'll say TikTok, Instagram, those types of platforms. So considering where and how you're posting, and it could even be that you're not on social media, that you have multiple forums, that you're looking at posting, job boards, local community centers, areas where people naturally gather and collect. I mean, they can be as creative and kind of as diverse as the area that you kind of have your business in, but it's all of these things in combination so that you can make that connection with your candidate. Another question is whether or not you are meeting in person, if it's virtual. I mean, obviously with COVID and post-COVID, there may be some challenges, geographical challenges. The nature of the work may be that it's a hybrid job that works remotely, so virtual is the best forum. I've just gone through interviewing with another candidate, another client, and it's been all done virtually. So it really depends on probably what you're comfortable with and the nature of your business. But it could, again, be a combination of doing interviews, conducting them in person or virtually. Another area is job fairs and events. Has anybody been involved with any of those or participating in any of those types of events? Had any experience with job fairs and events? I'm just kind of curious if anybody's got thoughts on that. Okay, oh, somebody's got it. Perfect. A couple of folks here, so let's just have a look here. Nope, long time ago. Okay. I mean, job fairs and events clearly with COVID have probably been put on hold. They've been done virtually as well. I've participated in virtual job fairs. They were actually kind of a neat thing, but you got to be kind of tech savvy and you're moving in and out of rooms. So, you know, depending on your audience, it may or may not have been kind of, you know, something on a virtual level that they were perhaps as comfortable with. But I see postings coming up now more for job fairs and events. So these are also areas where you can get in front of candidates. And we can talk again a little bit more about that. Anybody got walk-ins? I see a lot of that. Resources to prepare for a job fair. Okay. Okay, and there's 15 local events. Great. Okay. I'm just making a note of that. Perfect. So I'll come back to the question of preparing for a job fair because I think it's kind of a package of information that you might want to put together for potential candidates that come past your business. And depending on what your business is, you know, maybe it's samples, maybe it's a pamphlet, maybe it's a link to your website. It could be a variety of things that you give to people that would allow them to learn more about your business, not only just being able to talk to somebody, potentially at a job fair. So there could be other information pointing people in a direction to learn more about your business. But it may also be other events that you want to consider from a job fair. So walk-ins, you know, I've seen a lot of signage around walk-ins. People are literally encouraging, if you're interested, come on in. We'll we'll do an interview on the spot. So I would say you've got to be well prepped for being able to do that on the fly, but that may work for your business depending on the nature of your business. Has anybody done any kind of open house events where you've actually opened up your business and invited people in? I know, again, with COVID and just sort of operational challenges, that might be difficult, but again, this is intended to get you thinking about how can you get in front of your candidates? How can you make them aware of your business, engage with them, attract them to your organization? And sometimes seeing the business kind of quote real life is also a good way to kind of begin that conversation or potentially start to attract those candidates. Okay, I'm going to scooch along here time-wise. So going direct to the candidates is another question. So Amanda and I were just talking briefly before we got onto the call. One of the things around hiring, they worked with local universities and Blue Mountain hosted it. This was pre-COVID, and they invited employers to come on site and participate in a day's activities that had students going through job interviews and writing resumes. And there were a variety of events for students, but one of the key things were students were able to kind of go and meet local companies on site at this event. And that again was starting to connect with that perhaps younger generation, newer into the job market talent, and start making those connections with them. So networking, going directly to the candidate might be an interesting way for you to make some of those connections. And again, you may be doing any of these, all of these, or something a little different depending upon your business. So the other thing we want to think about is who or what are you hiring for? It might sound obvious, but if anything's changed in your business since the last time of hiring, business processes, the competitive landscape, again, just go back and do a little bit of a check-in, job descriptions. Are there new skill requirements? Maybe you've changed the way you do your work in your business. So again, the idea here is just when you're thinking about hiring and getting ready to hire, would be to, just take a look at your business and the last time you were hiring, has anything changed and what needs to be updated? The other piece is what I call the non-negotiables. So this is kind of an interesting one. I call it what a candidate's got to bring to the table. So this could be experience, skill set, certifications, licensing, whatever it is that's important to your business. But what are you also prepared to train for? I know in the previous call, one of the employers shared that, they're willing to hire for attitude and train for capability, which, could be an interesting way and a smart way to do it, because attitude is sort of within that individual, and the skill sets very often, again, depending on the business, could be something that could be more easily trained. And so again, it's just looking at ways to increase the potential for you to bring candidates into your business and get the right person into the job. So having a plan, again, some of these things seem fairly straightforward. But in here, I'm looking at reviewing the interview process itself, and I think somebody raised that in the question previously, so I'll talk a little bit more about that. But consider whether you need to do any kind of assessment as part of the interview. So I'll give you an example. I worked with a manufacturing organization, and we ended up having to do not only interviews with candidates, so kind of person to person, but we also needed to do some testing. It was a technical job. It required a very particular skill set. And so there were actually some tests that were set up for them to actually demonstrate they had the technical capability to, in this case, it's called a box test, and they had to fix something that would show, so we weren't just relying, and I think that's kind of a question that was raised earlier. We weren't relying necessarily what was entirely on the application or the resume. We were actually physically testing because it was critical to the job, right? That somebody could actually demonstrate that. So another example, recently hiring somebody into a social media type role, we actually asked for work samples. So examples of the work they've done, not job postings, but marketing tools, social media posts, written communication. So they shared with us some of their sample work, so we could also take a look at how they'd set that up. So that may be another consideration. And we've got somebody in the chat here. so it's a question of hiring for personality. Is there a formal personality? So there are lots of personality tests. We can maybe parking lot that one and come back to it. But I'm going to share with you something from a behavioral-based interviewing that may address some of this question around getting to that organizational fit in terms of how you're framing your interview questions. So the other thing is, who needs to be involved in the process of interviewing and hiring? You know, do more team members need to be involved? Sometimes it's important if it's a small team, maybe you get to your final candidate or a couple of candidates to get some team input. They may not have the final vote, but at least they're involved in the hiring, because again, from bringing somebody into the organization and that organizational fit, you may get some good feedback from involving other people. So just who needs to be involved in the interviewing process? I would also say be realistic on timeframes. I mean, generally speaking, people want somebody like yesterday, but this speaks to kind of that planning strategy. If you're a seasonal organization, again, there's probably lots of off-season stuff that you're involved with getting ready for the next season. But again, working backwards from that kind of kickoff date to when you actually want people, allowing enough time is kind of a key aspect. But one thing that I would say is I would recommend employers, particularly in this market, are in this kind of what I would call constant state of hiring, right? So if you get applicants or you see somebody and maybe you have one position, but you've got two people that were really close, don't lose that other person, right? Find ways to keep them, quote, warm, engaged, you know, positive feeling about the organization, because you may have need to hire, and then it's easier to reach out and connect with somebody that you may have already connected with in a previous process, okay? So I'm going to keep moving through here. So I'm just going to put this here just as a call out. I'm sure you're all aware of human rights, and just being aware of your hiring practices need to ensure that they don't include any areas that could potentially run against what's protected under human rights. And I've included a link that's got some interesting information there if you have time to take a look at it. I think it's a couple of pages. So anything I'm including are not going to be kind of war and peace. They should be kind of quick reads just to refresh yourself, again, if you're gearing up for hiring. The one thing, obviously, people may already be familiar with this, is what they call bona fide occupational requirements. So there are exceptions where you can specifically ask for something that may on the surface look like it's a going against human rights, but it's deemed to be relevant for the job. So example, a specific licensing requirement, or maybe there's a health and safety requirement in terms of color vision. I mean, we could have a conversation around what's changing with technology and so on and so forth, but the reality is you could have things that you can hire for and you can ask specifically for, as long as it is tied and necessary for the job. So I said at the beginning, but it's something that was said to me very early on when I was from an HR perspective, which is why I like to look at people as an asset as well as individuals. You know, if you think about your business and where you invest your money in terms of equipment and tools, et cetera, generally speaking, these types of things depreciate over time, but people don't. People actually appreciate. So taking the time up front to plan out your hiring strategy, to put things in place, to try and ensure that you're getting the best fit that you can, and that was a question somebody also raised that we can kind of talk to as well. You're really trying to look at getting the right person for the right job at the right time. That's really your goal, okay? Because people, generally speaking, will increase in value. They increase their skill sets, they increase their contribution to the business. So that's just something to keep in mind. We don't necessarily need to answer these questions, but it was just something, again, to kind of have you think, you know, what does it cost your business to hire? What is the value or the return to your business on your investment? And it's not always financial, okay? There's customer satisfaction, engagement, there's goodwill, there's reputation. There are a lot of things in terms of hiring cost in terms of that investment. And it's just a question around, when you look at investing in other aspects of your business, how does that compare to the hiring process? So do you have a strategy? Do you have a plan? And I stated earlier that one of the things you may need to consider is to be in this kind of what I call a constant state of hiring, okay? Whether you have an opening or don't, you may receive resumes, you may meet people, you may make connections, and just keeping those contacts and connections warm, because something could happen where you need to kind of reach out, and that's going to cut your time down to being able to potentially hire. So what I like to do at the end of a section is maybe do some key takeaways. So we've already talked about these things, but I think Amanda's already said it. These workshops are intended, or these sessions, to try and just have you kind of think a little bit outside the box. We know everybody's struggling to find talent. Comments that people have shared earlier, you know, we get somebody, they don't live up to the expectations on their paperwork, or we hire somebody and then they walk. You know, how do we manage that? It's very disruptive to the business and challenging. So again, the idea here is to kind of keep thinking outside the box in terms of your business and what your business needs are. Okay, any questions at this point, or I'm going to jump into the next section? Okay, so this might be the section that will cover some of those questions that people asked earlier, or at the very least touch on them, with a view that if you have further need for information, again, reach out after this session with Amanda, and we can do it as a follow-up. Okay, so interviewing questions was one of the questions that was had. Another one was around the issue of documentation and you know, things not necessarily matching up to what somebody put on paper versus what they show when they come into work. So one of the things that I wanted to put out there are what I call considerations to help make the right hire. So we talked in the previous workshop about engaging job posting, right? So creating the widest candidate pool, making those connections, trying to give yourself the opportunity to draw from the widest, most diverse pool of candidates that you can. And you can do that through the job posting. We've already talked about the different forums and areas that you could post, or even the different connections with candidates that you could make. I would say clear understanding of job expectations and candidate non-negotiables, that will help you in your screening and your selection process. Meaning, if you're clear on what you can or cannot have in the role, and that kind of speaks to the not disagreeing comment of hiring for attitude versus capability, but you still need that skill set, then just being very clear on what is what I call non-negotiable for the job would be something that you spend a bit of time and be very clear on that, especially if you're going to have other people involved in the interviewing process. So everybody's talking off the same page. I'm going to focus a little bit on behavior-based interviews. I think that will address some of how to get to the questions from an interviewing perspective and help in that hiring decision. By being able to gather information through behavioral-based interviewing process. And I've already talked a little bit about assessment tools, and I gave an example of a company I worked at before, but it could be unique to your business, something that you like to kind of assess or test folks on when it comes to something that might be job critical. And again, this organizational fit, I think the comment in the chat box is kind of that gut feeling. I mean, people don't come with a handbook, unfortunately. And I mean, it would be great if you could kind of be able to screen and like know immediately this is going to be the right person. But there are definitely things that you can put in place, such as clear expectations in the job posting, really screening on those criteria that are non-negotiable, and then setting up a series of questions and an interviewing process that's going to help you get to a good sense of what this person is all about, any additional testing or examples of work that again are going to help you in that hiring process so that you ultimately get a good organizational fit and the right person for the right job. And this also speaks to maybe engaging with some other people to be involved in the interviewing process that might give you a slightly different perspective or be able to give you some additional feedback. So all things for you to consider. I think we may be I apologize on the mute thing again, but just we may have somebody off mute. So just letting you know that, okay? So behavioral-based interviewing, let me just ask a really quick question. is this, and I'm going to ask it, is anybody unfamiliar with behavioral-based interviewing and what it is? Want to just put a quick hands up or chat on that one? Okay, let me go back. So let me just walk through this relatively quickly, because again, we could spend time diving into this, and this might be one of the questions that we ask towards the end of this session as a follow-up. So behavioral-based interviewing, if you're not familiar with it, is you set up your interviewing questions to specifically ask for examples of how they would have handled a situation, a similar situation in your business to one in their past experience. The basic premise is it's difficult for somebody, quote unquote, to fake it, right? If they actually have experience in X subject area or work experience in a particular skill set, if they've done it, they should be able to explain to you how they did it, right? And it should ring true when you hear their response based on your understanding and your expectations. If they have not had experience in that particular area, it's difficult, or it's more difficult, the theory, to be able to kind of create it, right? And so the premise on behavioral-based interviewing is past behavior predicting future performance. Okay, so I'm going to kind of keep moving. Oh, got a chat on this one. Take a second here. Yep, perfect. Somebody's already saying that it's most effective. Personality and emotional responses are critical in hospitality. So that's great. I mean, if people are already using this type of interviewing, then that's great. It's generally accepted across multiple industries, but it definitely allows you to, I think, dig deeper and be more specific in terms of something able to give you an example of when they've done whatever it is, okay? So here's how you set up a behavioral-based interview and what you're looking for in a response. And I'm going to preface this by, for those of you that may or may not use this system, we could spend a lot of time talking to it, but I'm going to kind of walk us through it fairly quickly. So you frame the question to try and have the person give you a situation or a task. So can they provide an example of a similar situation? And you have to think about your business. What is critical to the job? What is the type of situation or task that that individual may encounter in the job? So you want to frame a question that's going to present them with that scenario. Give me an example of, provide me a time when, so we can talk about how we frame up those questions, okay? Then you're looking for them to give you the action that they took. So if they have experience and they have actually done it, they should be able to walk you through, in a sense, step by step, what they did to take action in that particular situation or task, okay? And then the final step for a behavioral-based interview is, what result did they get? So it could be that they were successful. It could be that they weren't successful. That's not necessarily the issue. But what you are looking for is, were they able to resolve the situation? Were they able to close out, excuse me, on the situation or the task, draw it to a conclusion? So you have a chance to hear from them what they did, how they did it, and what was the result, okay? And the other thing I'm going to highlight again, think about that multi-generational workforce. If you've got somebody who's newer into employment, I'm thinking Gen Zs, Gen Xers, you know, folks that are kind of newer, high school, let's say, level, just as an example, they may not have as much work experience, but they may have some work experience, some volunteering, there may be education or training. The same principle would apply. You could give them an example, and the question then is, you know, you can draw from any of your past experience, as long as they would be able to give you an answer that you would be satisfied with, that would demonstrate to you that they actually have done that. And there's a comment here. Oh yeah, perfect, star. Somebody's been through it. Yeah, it's excellent. So again, I think the question was around framing questions for the interview. I mean, these aren't specifically to a particular job or company, but they're kind of, again, a generic idea, and it builds on that comment that was shared in the chat about stars. So if you can consider what is critical to the job, so whether they're soft skills, technical skills, or knowledge. But example, you may be looking at how somebody's handled difficult customers, somebody's met deadlines, somebody's had to work as part of a team. It could be any kind of subject area specific to your business and specific to the job. So that's what you're looking for. How did they behave? How did they respond in a particular situation? And then you want to know what they actually did. So you're looking for things like they remained calm, they prioritized, or maybe renegotiated if we're talking deadlines. They use words like collaboration, they engage with others, they listen to others. So you're looking for a response that gives you a sense of they've actually been in that same or similar situation to your business, and in all likelihood, put into that situation going forward in your organization, they would likely perform well, okay? And then frame a question based on the scenario to your business. So I just did an example here, and it was dealing with a difficult customer. So you might say something like, please provide an example of a time you had to deal with a difficult customer. What was the situation? What did you do to resolve the issue? And how did it turn out? So that's kind of the basic question formula. If you're looking at your business to set up some interview questions. And we've got another comment here. Yeah, this is great. This is great. Good feedback. So I'm just going to keep moving here in the interest of time. So interviewer tips, it's just being prepared, quite frankly, for the interview. And I think the key takeaway here is it's a conversation, not an interrogation. I mean, there's no harm, no foul. If this is not the right fit for your organization, then that's not an issue. You may, in fact, have some other role this person might be, a good fit for, just not at this time. So I would always, in this idea of constant recruiting, keep that in mind, right? You don't want to necessarily burn a bridge or turn off a potential candidate. Assessment tools, I'm going to touch on this briefly because I don't know what people's businesses are. But if you have an organization where there are job-specific requirements, so it could be, it's a company where there's creativity and writing, social media, those types of things, you may want to ask for examples. If it's a technical trades type related outside of maybe their, what's the word I'm looking for, apprenticeship or examples, you may actually want to see some of their work, right? Or have them do a slight, show me how you would, put this together or fix this kind of thing, just so that you, again, have a good sense of whether or not they actually have the skills, the capabilities that you're looking for. Okay. Key thing here is if you're going to do interviewing, assessment, whatever combination, just make sure that your process is the same for every candidate that comes through for that job to be fair and consistent. So the benefits of making the right hire, I think these are reasonably self-explanatory, right? I think the one point that I'm highlighting here is obviously the cost to your business in a wrong hire. And I hear this sometimes out of frustration more than anything. I think in fairness to employers is kind of, the right body versus anybody, right? I mean, I just need to get somebody in here. So either you have to accept that that may bring some challenges that you're going to have to manage in your organization if you make that decision, or you hold out and again, you look at your process, you look at what you're considering in terms of the position, and you make the right fit the first time as much as you can. And that may lead to how much time you allow for the interviewing process, how wide do you send out your search, those candidate connections that you're making. It's all of those things when you think about your strategy and your plan for hiring in your organization. Okay. So again, we're not necessarily going to answer these questions, but the cost of making the wrong hire, right? So I mean, that again doesn't always have a financial cost. There's other cost implications, and other impacts to the business. And I'm curious here in terms of how soon did you take action? And this is kind of my little HR piece is, if you bring somebody into the organization and they're not a good fit, then, I think if you've given everybody the opportunity to be successful, so you're trying to set them up for success from the get-go, but they just turn out to not be the right fit, the sooner you can take action, the better. I will tell you from my experience being in multiple organizations, and for anybody who's got the HR background on the call, hopefully you'll agree, call it early, right? Don't live with a decision because the cost implications to the organization, and not just financially, can grow pretty rapidly with primarily dissatisfaction, for example, in some of your good performers when they see somebody who's not performing. So the key takeaways here, and I've included a link to an interview guide, and I think that also may be for the person that asked the question about a guide from an interviewing perspective. It's just this issue of making that investment in the interviewing process, setting up an interviewing guide, being very clear on what you're hiring for, framing up your interview questions to be able to target that, and then understanding the benefits of making that right hire. And that might be this, the right person versus somebody to come in. Again, recognizing that there are huge challenges at the moment in the workplace to find talent. Okay. I just see another cat. Do you have information on what to do if you need fire with some? Yeah, so firing, the opposite end of the spectrum. Yes, we can take that one offline if that is something that you need to talk about. Okay, but yes, how to gracefully exit somebody from your organization. That's the way I'll phrase it. Okay, so now I'm going to go into the last sort of bit that I wanted to talk to here was moving from the interview to the offer. So once you've selected that final candidate and you've made that offer, okay, so I can provide a bit more detail to that, but essentially you've done your interviews, you've done any assessments you want to do, you believe you've got the right person, and you make the offer. I'm calling out here what I said before. Even if you have unsuccessful candidates, you could have two very strong candidates. You only have one position. You have somebody who was a very close runner-up. Don't lose the connection with that person. Again, you build that positive experience. They will go out and share that with others. They had a great hiring experience with company ABC. They were sad they didn't get the job, but you know what? They were really keen, and the employer actually wants to keep in touch. So these are all goodwill things, and you never know. You may actually need to bring somebody else on board. And again, you can cut your time to hire potentially if you've already got some people that are kind of being kept, I'll use the word warm, right? That you could perhaps reach out to and reconnect. And I did have an employer do that just recently with a candidate that they hired back in the fall of last year, and they've actually gone ahead and hired them this time for a different role they had in their organization. So it does play out. And being prepared to have all your documentation ready for a new employee and having an onboarding process. And there's a couple of chat comments here. Okay, perfect. So that was on the termination question, I think, that was put out there before. Okay, so you may again already have some of this in place. This is intended to be a bit of a tune-up. Check your current practices. So you might want to consider having a new hire package. So that's all the documentation, any materials, anything that the employee needs ready to go, okay? And I think we talked about that before, about job fairs and having information that you could share with people. Obviously, you wouldn't have an offer letter, but you could have other non-proprietary, non-confidential information as a candidate package. And you can say, look, it's great talking to you today, but here, take a look at all this information, go on our website, that type of thing. But from a hiring perspective, it would be good to have a new hire package ready to go. So you've got all your documentation lined up. I can't tell you the number of times I've worked in businesses, people start, and if you have a business that requires them to log into a system and the system isn't set up, they lose so much time trying to get set up to IT or their website or business systems, whatever it is. Just make sure that their system is set up and it's ready to go from day one. Workstation set up, again, in a pre-COVID or post-COVID world. They may not be, working in an office, but again, making sure they've got all their tools, whatever that is, uniform storage, keys, pass cards, everything's ready to go, site information. What I found really helpful in previous employers is having some information that's kind of more generic. You may have an employee handbook, and that's where you would list policies and procedures, include key company documents like harassment policy or violence in the workplace or health and safety or your mission, vision, whatever it is. But your employee handbook may be virtual. You could have it online on your website if you have one, or have it as an actual handbook that people can take some time and have a look through. But you have an onboarding plan, which is really that first week that somebody's going to start with you. Outside of having all the tools and material and documentation ready to go, you've also got things planned for their first week. There's nothing more frustrating than somebody starting with an organization and kind of being left to sit and twiddle their thumbs because everybody's running around at 150 miles an hour and nobody's kind of helping this person get integrated into the business. So onboarding, the benefits speaks for itself. And if anybody's got an onboarding process, I'm sure in the chat you can add your comments, but really it's going to help somebody hit that ground running. Again, hopefully you've hired somebody that's going to bring the skills and the capability into the organization, but the more you can do to get them to hit the ground running as soon as possible, the better you start to get that return on that investment from a business perspective. These are just some considerations for an onboarding plan. So they fall into these 4 broad buckets of compliance, clarification, culture, and connection. So if you think about it, you know, what do they need to know about compliance? What do they need to know about job expectations? You know, begin to set those conversations up around performance. That goes back to my comment of if you start to see it going off track, get it corrected sooner. If it's really off track and you have to sort of part ways, then being able to make that call early is of benefit. The culture is really important. People join organizations because they believe in what the company's doing and they see value and merit. And so any of that type of information, and then connecting them with the team, making sure maybe they've got a buddy, somebody that can spend time with them over the first few days to make sure that they're getting access to the information that they need. So this is just more of the same. I understand we may have people online who have businesses that are seasonal, so maybe your actual business time in the year is of a shorter time period. I put in here on point 2, we call it 30, 60, 90-day plans. It's really somebody being able to check in, but it's based on kind of job complexity. The more senior, typically the more complex, you may need a longer onboarding time to bring somebody up to speed versus somebody in a role that might be more task oriented, for example, and it's more straightforward. And so their ability to ramp up is much faster. But regardless, you still want to make sure you're onboarding them correctly. Okay. And point 4, I think, is important. Be reasonable in terms of that learning curve. You should have a good sense of what a reasonable learning curve would be for somebody coming into the job in your organization. And so just again, kind of the key takeaways here is, you know, having a new hire checklist, making that onboarding plan, protecting your investment. If you think about everything it's taken for you to get from initially needing to hire somebody through job posting, through screening, through interviewing, through hiring, you know, there's a lot of time, effort, and resource, including money, that's been put into that process. So you want to sort of consider how you are managing that to protect that investment. And I think this comment's come up in the chat, and I would just add it. Typically, we tend to hire for character and we train for skill. That's not 100% the case, but I think most folks on the call would agree that attitude is sometimes more difficult to train or teach somebody. And that speaks to, I think, some of these behavioral-based tests that people mentioned in the chat as well that we can follow up on if that's a further question that somebody has. So I think I've covered off on the summary there, what I just sort of said to everybody. And just take a minute now to thank everybody for your time. We've got about 5 minutes left, according to my 5 or 6 minutes, according to my watch here. It looks like I've backed myself out there. Are there any questions? I'm just going back through policies and procedures for training staff. We can follow up on that one, I think. Interview questions, I've given you sort of a brief example, if you go back into the material, how to set it up. And if you look at the interview guide, the embedded document that's included in the deck, and Amanda, we can add that in for people, but that might be a document that would be helpful. And I'm sorry, Amanda, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to again recap for everyone that we are going to send a bunch of follow-up documents to this that you can reference afterwards. So kind of like a quick checklist of some of these things that we've mentioned today in the slides, a copy of the slide deck. We're going to provide a basically creating a job posting kind of guide, if you will. We talked a little bit about that. And then of course, encouraging everyone to book one-on-one consults. We know that this was kind of a skimming the surface. And tough to do in an hour, right? It's such a broad topic. So, welcoming the feedback because this can be the beginning of much more
Yeah.
targeted sessions. But of course, again, those individual conversations where we can really get into some of your specific needs and tackle those workforce challenges.
Yeah, no, really, just to add to Amanda, just really appreciate in the chat some of these comments in here. And again, I think maybe, Amanda and I had talked at the beginning here, maybe there's some questions around, developing job criteria, creative, attractive job postings. I mean, again, time could be spent to take a look at that, promoting job opportunities. We've touched on these briefly in this session and the previous one, and the next session is on retention. So it really was intended just to get you thinking about areas. And as Amanda said, I would highly encourage, if you've got specific questions for your business, to definitely reach out to Amanda to book a bit of one-on-one time, because as much as we'll give you some kind of handouts and overviews, it certainly would be of benefit to have sort of a deeper dive type conversation. So your feedback's really been appreciated. And I see Amanda's popped that in there already in the chats. That's awesome. Any other questions just before maybe we have 2 or 3 minutes here. If there's anything specifically, I'm just going back through some of the chat comments. I think this one around termination, that's one I would suggest those folks that kind of pointed that out, maybe just reach out to Amanda on that one. Can we provide sort of generic? Yeah, we can provide some generic what to do if you run into that situation. But my experience is typically there's sort of some nuances and things that are usually case specific that you might need to consider without knowing that in any detail at this point. Anything else though that maybe top of mind we asked at the beginning of the session that we didn't necessarily get to, that if we've got a minute or two? Preparing for a job fair, perfect. Okay. Yep, we can provide something for that. Okay, I think if that's everybody's questions, I'm respectful for your time. So I would just like to thank you again and thank Amanda for the opportunity to get some time with you guys and recognize that we literally skimmed the surface. So appreciate your attention and your questions on this. This is awesome. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.